Every one of these is something you were taught as a rule. 11 of them are real, 1 I had to cut, and not a single one is actually a rule. So I built audio plugins on my own, and I kept running into the same thing over and over again. A number everybody repeats with the conditions missing. So I went and actually read the papers. I checked 12 claims. 11 held up under conditions people leave out. 1 of them I couldn't source, so I cut that out. Let's jump straight into the first one. So here's a comparison. Same loop twice. Tell me which one you like the best. So one of these was a decibel louder. That's the only difference between them. So you probably heard that half a decibel is enough to swing your preference. I went looking for where that number comes from. It traces back to a discrimination study. Pulse sine tones in a booth asking whether people could tell 2 levels apart. Telling 2 things apart and actually preferring one of them are different questions. The number answers the first one and gets quoted for the second. What is real though is that the standards for listening test require you to match levels before you compare, not to a number. By ear, by trained listeners, every time. You've had this one. You turn the monitors up and the mix suddenly sounds better, and for about a minute you think you fixed something. Same loop twice, same file, same balance, same everything. The only thing I changed is how loud it is. Louder just feels fuller, and nothing in that file moved. So whatever just happened in you. And here's the part I didn't expect. This is almost entirely a low-end effect. Go from a quiet listen to a loud one, and 40 Hz come up around 13 decibels, relative to a kilohertz. At 4 kHz it moves the other way, about a decibel down. So the usual smiley drawing is just too simple. The bass rises like a ramp while the top barely changes. When a mix opens up as you turn it up, that's mostly your low end arriving. And that curves come from a standard that is careful about what it measured. A pure tone straight in front of you, no room, listeners age 18 to 25, none of which is your track. In your room, on your monitors. So don't turn this into an EQ instruction. Pick one monitoring level and make your balanced decision there. Change the level and you can end up chasing your own playback choice. 3 sounds. All 3 hit the same ceiling to the decibel. The sustained ones feel much louder. Same peak, different loudness. And a peak meter cannot see that at all. A loudness meter can, which is why the 2 exist. And here's the bit that gets repeated wrong. People say the ear integrates over 400 milliseconds. 400 milliseconds is the block length inside a loudness meter. It's a design choice in a standard, and someone turned it into a fact about your head. So when it was actually measured, the difference between a 5 millisecond sound and a 200 millisecond one ran from about 10 decibels up to nearly 19, and it moved with level. There's no single number in there to quote. The standard is very careful about this in a way the internet isn't. It calls its own output an estimate. So when you're judging how loud something feels, use a loudness meter as the estimate. Keep the peak meter for clipping. It will not tell you loudness. Alright, so you can't hear the beep, so you turn it up, and you still can hear it. You just have a louder problem. Something near it in frequency is in the way. Move the noise away and the beep comes back at the level it was already at. There's a bandwidth people quote for this, and it's a real model. About 130 Hz wide at 1 kHz, about 450 at 4. It grows with frequencies, and it moves with level, and it's not a wall. In one experiment with a 4 kHz signal and a masker at 2.4, the suppression they could infer ran from 6 decibels to 17 across 4 listeners. 4 people, 3 times the range. So there's no number of decibels or hertz that makes something safe. There's only arrangement. So when something won't come through, don't reach for the fader first. Find what is sitting next to it in frequency and move one of them. Start with arrangement. This has been playing at the same level the whole time. It isn't the same to you anymore. In the measurement, most of that drop happened in the first 3 minutes, not 45, 3. And that's a pure tone in a lab, on 16 young listeners. So don't take the number to your session, take the direction. The thing people call ear fatigue is 2 different things wearing one name. What just happened to you is your judgment of loudness moving while the sound stays put. And the other one is an actual shift in your hearing threshold. In the study that tested it, 33 young adults listened to 4 hours of in-ear music. It only showed up reliably between 98 and 102 dB. At 93 to 95, they couldn't separate from ordinary test-to-test variation. So of course take breaks, I do that as well, just don't tell yourself the 45-minute schedule is sourced. Same 2 sounds every time, only the gap changes. This is the one where I can't give you a number, and I want to be straight about why. The famous figure is about 4 seconds. In the original work, that 4 seconds only holds when you're remembering where a sound came from. Ask people to remember what it was, and it drops to about 2. And in newer work, 12 listeners comparing small pitch differences got worse over 5 and 10 seconds when the sound was inharmonic. And it was also held up better when it was harmonic. So what fades depends on what the sound is and what you are asked about it, rather than a timer running down. What I can point at though is the standard for listening test, which switches in about half a second to a second. The reasoning there is practical. The less you have to hold in your head, the less you invent. So switch fast, compare things back to back, and put less weight on anything you had to hold in your head. One tone, one speaker, nothing moving but the microphone. There's a frequency people treat as the line where your room stops mattering. It has a formula, and the formula has a constant in it that you choose. Take for example a 60 cubic meter room with a 200 millisecond decay. Pick one convention and its line calculates to 115 Hz. Pick the other and the same room, the same numbers, give 230, nobody measured either one. You'll see a number quoted for how much the bass changes when you move your head. I went looking for it. What's published is a simulation comparing positions to an average. It isn't a measurement of you leaning forward. So, your seat is part of your monitoring, and there's no universal dB number for how much. So before you touch the low end, move your head. If the bass changes when you lean, you're hearing the room as much as the mix, and the fix is where you sit and what is behind you. Same file 3 times. Don't tell me which is wider. Tell me whether it's inside your head or out in the room. Headphones hand each ear its own channel with almost nothing leaking across. Speakers can't do that. Both ears hear both boxes, filtered by your head on the way. So headphones give you more separation. What they don't give you is a width you can trust, because the image usually sits in your head rather than out in front of you. And before this turns into a headphones can't do space, that overcorrects too. When researchers synthesized the signals your eardrums would actually receive, listeners couldn't tell the headphone version from a real source in the room. So a hard pan that sounds enormous on headphones is telling you about separation. It isn't telling you what that will be on speakers. One snare, then the same snare again, a fraction of a millisecond later. That part is arithmetic. The first notch sits at 1 over twice the delay, then they repeat every 1 over the delay, and they don't move. 36 experienced audio engineering students and professors were tested on this at a delay of under a millisecond. They were asked whether they could tell the calmed version from the clean one. They still could with the second copy 13 decibels down on piano, 18 on snare. One of them managed it at 27 down. That's detecting a change in the sound rather than hearing a separate copy. It still means it's 20 dB down. It can matter. It's not a safe thing to believe. And the other half of the rule, that under 30 milliseconds it's tone and over 30 it's an echo, is two experiments glued together. One asked whether you could hear coloring, the other asked whether speech got annoying. Different questions. One number stuck on both. So if something sounds hollow and you can't find it, look for a second copy of that sound. A duplicated track, a delay you forgot, a room mic, mute the copy, or move its timing, then try and listen again. There's no 100 Hz in this sound. Every component is 200 and above. With this sound, most listeners should hear a pitch near 100. You're hearing what works out fundamental that harmonic series belongs to, and hands you the answer, whether or not the fundamental is in the air. Which is why people say the brain restores the missing fundamental and then conclude the fundamental doesn't matter. It matters. That's energy. That's headroom. That's the speaker moving. And now on how it works. The honest answer is that it depends which harmonics. For the high, closely spaced ones your ear can pick apart. The careful experiment found no evidence for the timing explanation. That was once they masked the distortion your own ear adds. Which is a result about those harmonics under those conditions. It doesn't settle the mechanism generally. I wanted to end this on what your phone can reproduce. I couldn't get a number I trusted. 3 flagship phones measured in an ergonomic chamber differ by 12 decibels from each other at 80 Hz. And those are relative figures, not sound pressure. There's no typical phone level I can defend. So don't let a small speaker tell you the low note is there. It can hand you the pitch without the energy. If the fundamental matters, check it somewhere that can actually reproduce it. Okay, so this one I actually had to cut, and cutting it in front of you is more useful than keeping it. I wanted to tell you what share of listening happens on something that's effectively mono at the bottom. It's the number that would make the whole argument land. I couldn't find one. Phone sales don't answer it, because owning a phone doesn't tell you whether the sound left through it. Through headphones, through a car, or through a speaker with 2 drivers in it. So I can show you that the side content disappears when a path sums to mono. I can't tell you how often you're on that path. which is the argument for checking rather than assuming, and it's a better argument than a number I made up would have been. Okay, you probably have heard this one. People say under 30 milliseconds the two fuse, and over 30 you hear an echo. So I built audio plugins on my own. The experiment people are citing measured something else. It played continuous speech with one echo, outdoors so the room wouldn't interfere, and asked at what delay half the listeners felt disturbed. At equal level, the answer was 68 milliseconds, not 30. So I built audio plugins on my own. Then he turned the echo down 3 decibels, and it moved to 108. 6 decibels down, 175. So I built audio plugins on my own. Level moved the answer by more than 100 milliseconds. So a rule made only of milliseconds was never going to survive. And disturbed was never the same as I hear 2 sounds. Those are separate questions, and the 30 gets used for both. So that's 11 measured things, and 1 I had to cut for lack of evidence. Not one of them a rule. The pattern underneath them is the same every time. Somebody measured something carefully, wrote down the conditions it held under, and the conditions fell off to the way to you. There's one more, and it's the one I'd most like you to keep.
You gotta give me way more time. You gotta give me way more time. You gotta give me way more time.
Your ears aren't badly made. That lift around 3 kHz is the shape of your own ear and ear canal, and it's there before you've made a single decision. There's a second thing your alarm system tracks, and it's speed. Screams sit in a particular flicker rate, somewhere between 30 and 150 times a second. In the study that measured it, that flicker reads the fret circuitry, rather than the part of you that has opinions about hi-hat. So a mix that feels like an assault is your hearing doing something real. Nobody measured a purpose, so I won't hand you one. What was measured is where your ear is most sensitive and what your alarm system reacts to. Both of those answer a question that was never, is this hi-hat too loud? That's why you check. Your ears answer a different question than the one you're asking every time. So 11 of these were measurements, taken under conditions, and the conditions fell off somewhere between the paper and you. 1 was a number I could not source. So when someone hands you a number, ask what it was true of. I'm one person making these, so if you want more of them, subscribe does generally help a lot. And if you know a rule I should check next, tell me in the comments.